house of Mary Vic Griswold, and we are going to try to tape some of her memories, strictly of the cuff of the head. My name is Alvaro. I am supposed to be the technician. The day is February the 15th, 1997, the day after Valentine's Day, by the way. And here we are, and Fred Lang is the engine behind this taping. And I hope that people, future members of the church, will enjoy what they are going to, we are going to tape. Thank you.
My name is Fred Lang, Jr. I've been a member of the Society since 1964, the first Unitarian Society of Plainfield. I was president in 1980 and have held many different offices. I would, again, look forward to today's memories of the Society presented by Mary Vic Griswold. And as Alvaro said, it's very informal, off the top of her head, but we need more human interest and human history of our society, and we hope this will be recorded. Thank you.
I've never really...
Here we are.
Oh.
We are on.
Okay. I'm Mary Vic Griswold. I belong to the church really since the year one because my family came from New England, and they were Unitarians in New England. And so naturally when they came to Plainfield, my father worked in New York, they decided to go to the Unitarian Church. And at the time, the Unitarian Church was not what I'd call socially acceptable, the way it was in New England. And most of the New Englanders who came down here went to the more popular church called Crescent Avenue Presbyterian. Anyhow, my mother and father found themselves very much at home in the Unitarian Church, but it was not a large church, and they did have a hard time getting a minister. And the first things I remember about the church, and it must have been, I must have been very impressed because I remember that one of the members named Henry Wells came to my father, and he said, "Horace, I think I found a minister for us." And so my father they had been having a hard time finding someone. They were such a small congregation, I imagine it was because of the money. And so Dad said, "Oh, well, wonderful, where is he and who is he?" and all that sort of thing. And Mr. Wells said, "He's a minister, he's a minister without a church, and he's out in Ohio. And the reason he doesn't have a church is because during the First World War, well, it was 1914 to 18, and this was about 1918, he was a pacifist, and so no church would have him. So I think he'd be glad to have a church, and I think he's going to be the minister for us." Well, it was a small church, and there wasn't anything like a committee or anything like that at the time, so that they really, between them, they decided. That's what they'd look him up and see where they wanted to come, and that's what they did. And he said he would like very much to come to Plainfield, and so he came with his wife and his young daughter. And at the time he did come. There was very little money, and he didn't have very much money, so he had an apartment in I think First Place, which is round this corner from the church.
What was his name?
His name was Allison H. Robinson. Not Allison, but Alson, really, A-L-S-O-N. Alson H. Robinson. He was quite a large man. He had a very noticeable tick. His head shook a lot. And you got used to it. You never thought about it after you'd known him, or really earlier. He was quite nervous, but enthusiastic and delighted to have a church. And from that time on, partly because of his personality and his preaching, the church began to grow. And from then on, I don't know how it grew from year to year, but it became it was a good congregation. I think, I would say really that a lot of it was due to my father. Well, not a lot, but he did raise the money, not from himself, but he made the rest of the members realize that to have a church, you had to support the minister, and you had to give him a good salary. So from then on, I don't think there was any time when it stopped growing. As usual with Unitarians, people came and left, and others came, and it wasn't that there was a lot of movement in and out of Plainfield. And so that's the part I really remember. And then, you see, as that went on, as the growth went on, then they needed more room. And so then they decided they had to have a parish house with rooms along the side for the church school. So while we had been, the church school had been meeting in the back half of the church.
Did they have a drapery or a curtain, or
they had a curtain that they drew across the whole back of the church. So
how tall was it
but
about?
I don't know why that made any difference, because they certainly didn't meet at the time of the service. Well, anyhow, they had that curtain. And I don't really remember a lot of about the Sunday school, except that one time we played with clay, and we were supposed to be making houses the kind of houses that Jesus lived in when he was in wherever he was. Anyhow, that's what I remember, and I remember a little boy that I was so crazy about. And he was younger, and I just wanted to hug him all the time. He was so cute. Anyhow, from that time on, I think the things I remember about Sunday school are the teachers. Miss White was a kindergarten teacher, and she was a wonderful teacher for us. And then there was Miss Edgerton, who was another teacher, who took us through some of the other grades, and I remember some of the children in my Sunday school class. Mr. Robinson was an amazingly energetic and enthusiastic man, and he had all sorts of ideas about what to do and where we could go, and he liked to keep in touch with the other churches around, and also with a church in New York. And I remember he used to drive into New York and take whoever wanted to go to some of the services in there and some of the meetings. I'm kind of jumping around. The Sunday school developed, and it became quite large, and we had, as we went along, we had other people who were interested and who ran the Sunday school and kept it going. And then, of course, then we had the rooms in the parish hall where we could meet. And then when the parish hall was built, you could still see where they were. They put up basketball baskets. And so it was a kind of a gymnasium. For a long time, the younger people in the church had a basketball team, and they played basketball in the church, in the parish hall. And then afterwards, a group of older people who were had a what they called a Robinson something or other, and they played what's that game where you hit little birds around?
Oh, badminton?
Badminton. They played a lot of badminton. And so then, if you want to go on about what happened in the building, then the parish hall became a little small, and so they decided to add on to the wing, to add a wing onto the end of the parish hall. And since they had two architects who were members of the church, so one architect worked with the other, but the main architect was a man called Harry White, who had very strong ideas. He was also quite deaf. And he had his hearing aid right bang in front of his chest, and he was always fiddling with it. And you could never decide whether he was turning it on or turning it off. And sometimes it was a little difficult to work with because of that particular habit. Anyhow, it got built, and so we had more room, and we had more room for the Sunday school. Then we had what my mother had always wanted was a parlor where people could meet and sit and talk and have food. And so at the end of the parish hall wing, they put a big room, and they called it the Stevens room after my mother, because she was always talking about it. So that was, now I've gone on about the building. What if I better back up a little bit? I think that Mr. Robinson, because he was there, I think almost 25 years, about 25 years, made a great impact on the church. His sermons were very good. He believed in keeping in contact with other Unitarian churches. And he believed in...
Do you recall how many other Unitarian churches were in the
You
neighborhood?
know, I can't remember, except I'm sure there was one in Orange, and I think there was one in Summit. And there might have been one up north in maybe Ridgewood or one of those places, but I know the Summit and the Orange one church. As a matter of fact, when he retired, he started the church in Princeton. And also a church started in New Brunswick, partly because of his influence. And for a while there was a branch in Westfield, but they amalgamated with either with the Summit Church or with the Plainfield Church. I can't, as far as the church goes,
The building, you mean?
the building and the, I think I've talked enough about the building probably.
What about your parents? Could you describe your parents and what your father did? And you didn't give your mother's name. I think you should do that.
I think I should.
Yeah.
My mother was Helen Stevens, and she was very active in the Alliance. The Alliance was a group of women in the church who they felt that their sole really interest was to help raise money for the church, to have the church dinners, and to do anything else that they felt that was needed at the time. But I think mostly, as I remember the meetings of the Alliance as I grew older, and a lot of the discussion was the dinners and what they would have for dinner. When they did have dinners, when my mother and father were active, they had turkey dinners, and my mother would have the turkey cooked in the kitchen at home and then take it down. I remember one time at the end of the dinner, and they came home, and they came in, and then they kept coming into the house and then going out again. And I said, what? I asked what was the trouble. And my father said rather crossly, your mother has just dumped the gravy and the jelly into the back seat of the car, and we're trying to get it mopped up. So they were always very active, and my mother was a very strong woman, and she liked to help people, and I think she liked to run things too. And so she was probably president of the Alliance at times, but other people were president, and then there was a woman named Belle Coverley. Belle Coverley was the treasurer for years and years and years, and she always kind of straight. Well, she'd say, now I am going to give the treasurer's report, and everybody settled back and heard Belle Coverley give the treasurer's report. So the Alliance was a very strong group, very strong. And people, women from Westfield and Fanwood, and they enjoyed themselves. And you know, I don't know what they did in the Alliance. They had a sewing group that a woman kind of ran, and she ran it from her house. And they made different things, and they probably made some bandages for the hospital. But they met in her living room, I think about every other Tuesday, and then the Alliance met once at the church on Tuesdays.
Could you tell us a little bit about the style of sermons that were under Robinson? Did they have the Lord's Prayer? Do you remember a little bit what the type of service would be? I know they didn't have the fellowship, the chalice lighting, or the shaking the hands and greeting people, but I was wondering if you can remember.
It was a little more formal.
Mm-hmm.
It was a little more formal. But we had a regular little thing, and a little piece of paper, a little pamphlet that we read from.
Oh,
And I remember there was some reading of the Bible about the lilies of the field. Think not about, they toil not, neither do they spend, and yet I say unto you that so-and-so in all his glory is not arrayed like one of these. So they must have said it a long time, and often, because I can still remember it. And then they had the what do you want to say? Who are Unitarians? What do they believe in? You say they believe in the fatherhood of God, the brotherhood of man, the leadership of Jesus. Is that it? Maybe turn it around a little. Onward and upward forever. That was what we said occasionally, I think. There was a little thing that we followed in the Sunday school for the service. I guess we sang quite a lot, but not the ordinary hymns, you know, like Onward Christian Soldiers. We didn't sing those hymns, so I never knew them. And I went to another church. I didn't know what they were singing.
What about music?
They had a marvelous man who loved to play the organ.
You had an organ, the same organ that we have now?
No, an old organ. And his name was Stephen Haff. And Stephen Haff had a lot of children, and his children came to Sunday school. Mr. Haff was sometime a little difficult on Sundays because he drank too much. And Mr. Robinson had to pull him together and take him to church so he'd be ready to play the organ. But then he played the organ beautifully when he got there. So it didn't really make much difference to most of us. And he loved the organ. And then there were a couple of people. There was a woman who sang occasionally. Had a nice voice. And then there was a woman named Mrs. Vanas who played. She also sang. I can't remember whether she sang or whether she played a stringed instrument. They had, Mr. Robinson was great about forums. Especially, there were a number of things he did, and I really, he really was for a person who had a small church with a small following and was not looked upon about the other ministers, or was not considered to be spoken to almost as the other ministers. He had a lot of ideas, and one of the things was the forum. And every now and then he'd get somebody to come and speak, and it would be on a question that was of interest, and he'd get people to come in from outside the church. And then during the Depression, when people were musicians, didn't have places to play, he'd get them to come out, and we had wonderful small chamber music. They'd come out from New York. I think they'd probably pay their way, and then whatever collection we took would go to them, and they were delighted. We had really wonderful music then. I wasn't very interested myself, but we used to go, and I think there's the loveliest, I could tell then it was so good. So, you see, Mr. Robinson reached out, and he had a great imagination for thinking of other things that the church could do, and that he would like to see going. He always he took a whole summer. He and his family, Mrs. Robinson and Jerry, his daughter, would go up to New Hampshire and spend the summer. And anybody in the area who came were delighted to see them. They had a kind of a little cabin up outside of Littleton, New Hampshire. And when he got, and then Mrs. Robinson was one of her aunts died and left her some money, and they were able to build a house of their own in Plainfield. And then he began to move around a little more, and he went abroad, and he went to, if I'm going on about Mr. Robinson, then he went to England, to one of the big conventions, and he met some of the Unitarians from Hungary, or Romania really, and especially a young woman. And he thought she had a lot to give to Unitarians, and he helped her by bringing her over to send her to a school in Chicago where the Unitarians, to learn English because she was Hungarian. And her name was Vilma
Santos.
Yeah, Vilma Santos. Vilma Santos came over here and fell in love with an American who was also going to the school in Chicago. And they decided to, at the end of the year, to get married.
It was Donald Harrington.
Donald Harrington, who eventually took the ministry in New York City. And they spent their honeymoon, I think, in Hungary. And at the beginning, and this was the year of the start of the World War II. And they were in Hungary. And I remember Mr. Robinson called them or sent a cable and said, "Come back now." And so they got out of Hungary and came to the United States and lived in the United States the rest of their lives. And when Mr. Robinson took a year off for a sabbatical, Velma Harrington came and lived in their house and was the minister for the church during that year, an interim minister. Mm-hmm. And her little child, her little girl, grew up and played with our children. Now,
during the Depression, I understand for a while the finances of the church were rather precarious. I think it was a Nichols or a Nicholson that helped out financially, and your father helped out financially to carry the church.
I think Nichols, from Westfield.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What else? Then there were the two families in the church who were having hard times, and they helped the families. They got supplies, like in bulk, so that they were able to give supplies to those two families and help them along. But they were the only two.
Was the church financially in trouble during the Depression, do you know?
I don't know.
You know,
I
I
don't
see.
know. No, probably. Well, I don't know why I say that. I have no idea.
Yeah.
Carried on.
Uh,
Different people
yeah.
came and looked after things.
In 1945, Mortimer Gessner became the minister. I was wondering if you could describe him and maybe any change of service or...
Yeah. Well, you see, when Mort came to the church, Mr. Robinson had been there for, 25 years. It was a terrible, terrible shake-up. Mort was, we all liked Mort. Mort was the most likable man. But he wasn't Mr. Robinson, you know. What can you do? And the one who was probably, Mr. Half had long since gone as the organist, and we had a woman who played very well and played classical organ music. And Mort wasn't too interested in music, and she was upset, so she left. That was the thing we noticed most. I'm sure other people left because they were used to Mr. Robinson's style, and ministerial style had changed, and Mort was quite informal. And he went. I'll give you I wrote a limerick for him. We used to, when we had Thanksgiving, we always wrote limericks for each other. And the Gessners came and had dinner with us. And this is the limerick I wrote, because I was just thinking of it. A mighty fisherman he, a mighty man with the rod. It's easy to see, I mean H. Mortimer G. Shall I rhyme with God or Cape Cod? So that was a little bit, gave you an idea of his, I won't say his interests, but
Was he up?
his attitudes a little bit.
Was he up at Cape Cod a lot?
He came, oh yes, he had a house up there, and he
Oh,
went
I see.
up. He never went anywhere else.
I see.
And you see, Mr. Robinson went everywhere,
Yeah.
and Mort never varied, I don't think, between Plainfield and Cape Cod.
It's quite a contrast.
How long did he last?
I think Mort lasted 9 years, I think so.
No, he left at 1960.
11?
1960, so that'd be 15 years.
He had a heart attack.
Oh, I see.
He had a heart attack. And it made him he was kind of looking after himself. So at one point, Grizz, my husband, was head of the board of trustees, and he was always, you never knew whether Mort would be able to come and give a service or whether he was a little shaky. So that, Grizz said that made him a little shaky because he never knew whether when he got to church Mort was going to be there or not. That didn't last really very long. It was probably the spring, and then Mort was going to go up to the cave. And then